8-year-old Tina clutched the torn photograph tightly in her small fist, watching Min-joon stand at the altar beside a woman who planned to destroy him. The Grand Seoul Imperial Hall radiated dangerous opulence. 200 syndicate members dressed in midnight black suits, white orchids draped across gilded pillars, and crystal chandeliers refracting cold light across faces that had never known mercy. Yet Tina's dark eyes brimmed with tears. She had discovered Jeo's terrible betrayal, and this was her last chance to save the only father she'd ever known. The officiant raised his hands, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. Min-joon sigh. Please don't, Tina thought desperately, her heart hammering against her ribs. She doesn't love you. She's going to kill us all. Welcome my beautiful family. Before we dive deeper into this heart-warming tale, please do me a favor. I want you to subscribe, like and comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Now, sit back and enjoy this story. Min-joon had found her 18 months ago in the rain-soaked alleys of Itaewon, curled behind a dumpster like discarded trash. She'd been shivering in a dress 3 sizes too small, her braids matted with mud, clutching a stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. He'd come to collect a debt from a bar owner who'd been skimming profits, his Lieutenant Sang-woo flanking him with the usual cold efficiency that made grown men weep. But Min-joon had stopped mid-stride when he heard it, a child's voice, singing softly in broken English. Some nursery rhyme about stars. His mother used to hum that melody before the cancer took her voice, then her breath, then everything. Boss, we're on a schedule, Sang-woo had muttered, hand resting on the pistol beneath his jacket. Min-joon ignored him, approaching the dumpster slowly. The singing stopped. 2 enormous brown eyes peered up at him from the shadows, wide with terror but defiant. The girl didn't run. Didn't beg. Just stared at him with a kind of exhaustion that belonged to old men, not children who should have been learning multiplication tables. When did you last eat? He'd asked in English, his accent thick but clear. She'd held up 4 fingers. For days, he realized. 4 days in one of the wealthiest districts in Seoul, and no one had stopped. No one had cared. Something ancient and buried shifted in his chest, the part of him that remembered being powerless, being invisible, being nothing before he clawed his way to the top of Seoul's underworld with blood and calculation. He'd built an empire on fear. He'd eliminated rivals with surgical precision. But this child, this trembling scrap of humanity, looked at him not like a monster, but like a man who might choose mercy. Min-joon had shrugged off his coat, Ermenegildo Zegna, worth more than most people's monthly rent, and draped it over her narrow shoulders. You're coming with me, he'd said, the word surprising even himself. No one will hurt you again. Sang-woo's jaw had dropped. Boss, this is not your concern. Min-joon had scooped the girl into his arms, rabbit and all, feeling her relax against his chest with a broken sob. She'd whispered something he couldn't quite hear, her small fingers gripping his shirt like a lifeline. Later, he'd learned her name was Tina. That she'd been abandoned by human traffickers who deemed her too difficult to sell. That she remembered her mother's face but not her voice, her grandmother's hands but not her name. He'd given her a room in his penthouse. Given her safety. Given her the childhood that monsters like him had no right to provide but somehow, impossibly, wanted to. And now she was the only pure thing in his corrupted world. The announcement came on a Tuesday evening, delivered over Galbijim that Tina had barely touched. Min-joon had cleared his throat, something he never did unless the news was monumental, and told her he was getting married. To Jo Park, daughter of the Busan cartel's second-in-command. A strategic alliance, he'd explained, watching Tina's face carefully. The territorial wars were bleeding both organizations dry. This union would stop the violence, protect their people, ensure their future. Tina had forced a smile because Min-joon needed her approval more than he'd ever admit. Will she be nice? She'd asked, her voice smaller than intended. She will be family, he'd replied, which wasn't quite an answer. Jo had arrived 3 days later in a black Mercedes, stepping out in Chanel heels and a smile that never reached her eyes. She was beautiful in the way ice sculptures were beautiful, flawless, cold, and temporary. When Min-joon introduced them, Jo had bent down to Tina's level, her perfume suffocating. So you're the famous Tina, she'd said in Korean, her voice honey-sweet. Min-joon speaks of you constantly. I hope we can be friends. Tina had wanted to believe her. Desperately. She'd nodded, clutching her rabbit, trying to ignore the way Jo's manicured fingers had twitched when they touched her braids, as if dirted by the contact. Over the following weeks, Tina had tried everything. She'd drawn pictures of the three of them as a family, crude crayon figures holding hands under smiling sun. Jo had glanced at them and murmured, "Charming," before sliding them under magazine. She'd baked cookies with Min-joon's housekeeper, Mrs. Kim, presenting them to Jo on a plate decorated with paper flowers. Jo had smiled that razor-thin smile and said, "I don't eat refined sugar, but thank you, child." The mask only slipped when Min-joon wasn't watching. Once, Tina had accidentally spilled juice on Jo's briefcase in the living room. Jo's hand had shot out, gripping Tina's wrist hard enough to bruise, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Touch my things again, and I'll make sure Min-joon sends you back to whatever gutter he found you in." Tina had frozen, tears pricking her eyes. "I didn't mean. I don't care what you meant." Jo had released her with a shove just as Min-joon's footsteps echoed down the hallway. Instantly, the smile had returned, bright and false. "Oh, sweetheart, accidents happen. Let me help you clean this up." Min-joon had appeared in the doorway, looking between them. "Everything all right?" "Perfect," Jo had chirped, dabbing at the spill with a napkin while Tina stood trembling. "Just a little mishap. Nothing we can't handle together, right, Tina?" Tina had nodded mutely, her wrist throbbing beneath her sleeve. That night, she'd stared at the purple fingerprints blooming on her skin and understood with terrible clarity. Jo wasn't here to be family. She was here for something else entirely. Something that made Tina's stomach twist with dread she couldn't yet name. But Min-joon was happy. Happier than she'd seen him in months. He laughed at Jo's jokes, held her hand during meetings, spoke of the future with a lightness that had been absent since his mother's death. How could Tina tell him the truth when the truth would destroy the first peace he'd known in years? So she'd stayed silent, watching the Ice Queen tighten her grip on the only father Tina had ever loved. Tina had always been good at noticing things adults thought children couldn't see. It was a survival skill from her days on the streets, reading faces, catching lies, spotting danger before it spotted you. So when she saw the man with the dragon tattoo lingering near the service entrance of Min-joon's building, every instinct screamed wrong. She'd been returning from the corner store with Mrs. Kim, clutching a bag of rice crackers, when she spotted him. He wore a leather jacket despite the summer heat, and his neck bore the distinctive blue-green scales of the Yongsan Dragons, the rival syndicate that had been Min-joon's enemy for over a decade. Tina had seen those tattoos before, on men who'd tried to kill Min-joon at a restaurant last year. She'd hidden under the table while bullets shattered wine glasses and screams filled the air. "Mrs. Kim," she'd whispered, tugging the housekeeper's sleeve. "That man." But the man had already disappeared around the corner, swift as smoke. Mrs. Kim had looked down at her, confused. "What man, sweetie?" "Nothing," Tina had muttered, doubt creeping in. Maybe she'd imagined it. Maybe the stress of Jo's cruelty was making her see threats everywhere. Then she saw him again 2 days later, this time talking to Jo's driver, Mr. Cho, in the underground parking garage. Tina had been playing hide-and-seek with herself, a lonely child's game, crouched behind a concrete pillar near the elevator. The two men stood beside Jo's white Bentley, their voices low and urgent. "The timeline moved up," the tattooed man said in Korean, his accent thick with Busan dialect. "She wants it done the night of the ceremony. No delays." Mr. Cho nodded, his usually friendly face hard and unfamiliar. "The weapon?" "In the bouquet stem. Hollow titanium, undetectable by metal detectors. One thrust to the carotid during the first dance, and the Dragon King finally falls." Tina's blood turned to ice. Dragon King. That was what the underworld called Min-joon. They were talking about killing him. At his own wedding. And the girl? Mr. Cho asked, glancing toward the elevator. The tattooed man shrugged. "Collateral damage. Miss Park doesn't want witnesses who might remember details later. Kid's young enough that no one will miss her. Just another street rat." Tina's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp. She pressed herself flatter against the pillar, rabbit clutched to her chest, her heart hammering so loud she was certain they'd hear it. But the men were already walking away, their footsteps echoing through the concrete cavern until the garage door slammed shut. For a long moment, Tina couldn't move. Her legs had turned to water, her lungs refusing to work properly. They were going to kill Min-joon. They were going to kill her. And Jo, beautiful, perfect Jo, was orchestrating everything. But who would believe an 8-year-old girl over the elegant bride-to-be? Tina had no recording, no photograph, no evidence except the word of a child everyone already saw as damaged and desperate for attention. Even Mrs. Kim thought she imagined things. She needed proof. Real, undeniable proof. And she needed it before the wedding turned into a massacre. The ventilation shaft had always been Tina's secret world. When the penthouse felt too big and empty, when Min-joon was away on business and Mrs. Kim was cooking in the kitchen, Tina would slip into the guest bathroom, stand on the toilet, and push open the metal grate. Inside, the ducts formed a maze of silver tunnels that stretched throughout the entire floor, her private highway above the adult world. She'd mapped every inch over the past year. The shaft above Min-joon's study where she could hear him arguing with Sang-woo about territory disputes. The one over the kitchen where Mrs. Kim sang old folk songs while chopping vegetables. The one above her own room where she sometimes went just to feel safe, cocooned in metal and darkness. Today, 3 days before the wedding, Tina crawled through the shafts with purpose. She needed to hear Jo alone, unguarded, speaking to whoever was pulling her strings. The penthouse was busy with wedding preparations, florists arguing about orchid arrangements, caterers hauling equipment through the service entrance, Min-joon closeted in meetings about security protocols. Jo had retreated to the master bedroom, claiming a headache. Tina didn't believe her. Jo never did anything without calculation. The shaft above the master bedroom was narrow, forcing Tina to inch forward on her elbows, her rabbit stuffed in the waistband of her shorts. Dust tickled her nose. She pressed her face to the slotted vent, peering down into the room below. Jo stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul's glittering skyline, a phone pressed to her ear. Not her usual iPhone with the crystal case. This was a burner, cheap and anonymous. Tina's pulse quickened. "Tonight," Jo said in Russian, her voice sharp and efficient. Tina had heard enough Russian in Itaewon's backstreets to recognize the language, though she couldn't understand most words. But Jo switched to Korean mid-sentence, irritated. "No, you idiot. Not tonight. The wedding night. Once the rings are exchanged. Timing is everything." Tina's breath caught. She pressed closer to the vent, ignoring the metal edge digging into her cheek. "The weapon is secured," Jo continued, pacing now, her heels clicking against marble. Cho confirmed the hollowed stem passed inspection. "Security thinks it's just flowers." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Min-joon so desperate for peace, he's made himself vulnerable. The great Dragon King, brought down by his own sentimentality. Tina's hands balled into fists. Sentimentality. That's what Jo called Min-joon's kindness, his capacity to love something beyond power and money. "And the girl?" Jo asked, pausing by the window. Silence stretched as she listened to the response. "Good. No witnesses. I don't care how young she is, she's seen too much, heard too much. After Min-joon falls, make it quick. A fall from the balcony during the chaos. Everyone will assume she panicked." Tina's world tilted. The metal beneath her hand suddenly felt insubstantial, as if she might plummet through it into Jo's view. She bit down on her lip hard enough to taste blood, forcing herself to stay silent, stay still, stay invisible. "This ends the Kim syndicate forever," Jo said, her voice soft with satisfaction. "My father will control all of Seoul by sunrise. And I'll finally be free of this charade." She ended the call and threw the burner phone onto the bed, stretching like a cat who'd cornered her prey. Tina didn't wait to see more. She scrambled backward through the vent, metal scraping against her knees, lungs burning with suppressed sobs. She had her proof now, every terrible word confirmed. But proof meant nothing if she was dead before she could share it. Tina found Jo in the penthouse library an hour later, reviewing seating charts with a crystal tumbler of whiskey in her hand. Min-joon was downtown meeting with the wedding coordinator, and Mrs. Kim had left early for a doctor's appointment. They were alone. "I know what you're planning," Tina said from the doorway, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. She'd practiced the words in her mirror, trying to sound brave, trying to sound like someone who deserved to be taken seriously. Jo looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she smiled, not the sweet, performative smile she wore for Min-joon, but something colder. Reptilian. Do you now? I heard you on the phone. In Russian. You're going to kill Min-joon at the wedding. Tina stepped into the room, her rabbit clutched against her chest like a shield. The weapon's in your bouquet. You're working for your father. You're going to kill me too. For a moment, Jo said nothing. She simply studied Tina the way someone might study an insect before crushing it. Then she laughed, a genuine laugh, rich with amusement. You clever little rat. I underestimated you. The mask had finally dropped. Jo set down her glass and stood, her movements fluid and predatory. How much of that did you understand? Your Russian can't be that good. Enough, Tina lied, backing toward the door. I'm telling Min-joon everything. No, sweetheart, you're not. Jo moved faster than Tina expected, crossing the room in 3 strides and gripping her shoulder hard enough to make her gasp. Because Min-joon is finally happy. He's finally found peace. And you, traumatized, damaged little you, are going to ruin that with paranoid accusations against his bride. She crouched down to Tina's level, her manicured nails digging into Tina's arm. He saved you from the gutter, gave you everything, and this is how you repay him? By sabotaging the one chance he has for a normal life? What kind of grateful daughter does that? Tina tried to twist away, but Jo's grip was iron. You're lying. You don't love him. You're just using him. Of course I'm using him, you stupid child. Jo's smile widened, sharp as broken glass. Men like Min-joon are only good for 2 things, power and dying. And he's served his purpose for both. She yanked Tina toward the hallway, ignoring her struggles. Where's your phone? No, let me go. Tina kicked at Jo's shins, but the woman barely flinched. She dragged Tina into her bedroom. The princess room Min-joon had decorated with clouds on the ceiling and bookshelves full of stories, and rifled through her backpack with her free hand. Got it. Jo pulled out Tina's phone, the pink case decorated with stickers Min-joon had bought her. She pocketed it, then shoved Tina hard enough that she stumbled onto her bed. The wedding is in 2 days, Jo said, backing toward the door. You're going to stay here, be a good girl, and keep your mouth shut. If you try to warn Min-joon, I'll tell him you've been having episodes again. Seeing things that aren't there. He'll believe me, I'm his future wife. You're just a charity case with abandonment issues. The door slammed shut. Tina heard the distinctive click of the reinforced lock, installed for her protection, Min-joon had said, so no intruders could reach her. Now it was her prison. She threw herself against the door, pounding with both fists. Let me out. Someone help. Please. But the penthouse walls were thick, designed for privacy. No one could hear her scream. The Grand Seoul Imperial Hall lived up to its name with oppressive magnificence. Crystal chandeliers the size of luxury sedans hung from vaulted ceilings, each one dripping with light that refracted across marble floors polished to mirror shine. White orchids, Min-joon's mother's favorite, cascaded down gilded pillars in waterfalls of silk petals. 200 guests filled the cathedral-like space, their black tuxedos and dark suits creating a sea of shadows broken only by the occasional flash of diamond cufflinks or platinum watches. These weren't ordinary wedding guests. Min-joon recognized the faces, syndicate lieutenants from Gangnam, bosom underbosses who'd agreed to the truce, corrupt politicians who'd taken his money for years, and businessmen whose legitimate empires were built on foundations of blood. They'd come to witness history, the Dragon King finally tamed by marriage, violence replaced by alliance. But Min-joon felt no peace. Something gnawed at him, a splinter lodged beneath his ribs that he couldn't name. He stood at the altar in his custom Tom Ford tuxedo, Sang-woo beside him as best man, and scanned the crowd for the 100th time. Tina wasn't there. She'd promised to sit in the front row, wearing the navy dress he'd bought her specially. She'd even practiced walking in the uncomfortable shoes, wobbling down the penthouse hallway while he'd laughed and steadied her. I'll be there, Min-joon sighed, she'd said solemnly, using the formal address she saved for serious moments. "I'll be watching everything." But her seat sat empty, a void in the carefully orchestrated perfection. The orchestra began the processional, Pachelbel's canon, traditional and expected. Guests rose like a dark tide. Min-joon's hands clenched at his sides. "Where is she?" he muttered to Sang-woo. "Miss Jo said the child is ill. Stomach bug. Mrs. Kim is watching her at the penthouse." Min-joon's jaw tightened. Tina was never sick. She had the constitution of someone who'd survived streets and starvation, resilient in ways pampered children could never understand. And she wouldn't miss this. Not unless something was seriously wrong. "I should check on her." "Boss, you can't leave now." Sang-woo's hand settled on his shoulder, firm but respectful. "The guests, the alliance, everything depends on this ceremony. The girl will be fine. It's just nerves. Probably. Big changes are hard for children." The doors opened. Jo appeared in a pool of white light, her gown a masterpiece of lace and silk that had cost more than most people earned in a year. Her veil cascaded down her back like frost, and her bouquet, white roses and orchids bound with pearl-studded ribbon, caught the chandelier light. She was breathtaking, flawless, everything a bride should be. But Min-joon saw only the empty seat where Tina should have been. Jo glided down the aisle on her father's arm, Park Dae-jung, the Busan underboss whose smile didn't reach his eyes. The man had been Min-joon's enemy for 15 years, responsible for at least 3 attempts on his life. Now they were becoming family. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like swallowing glass. Jo reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in Min-joon's. Her skin was cold despite the warmth of the hall. She smiled up at him, radiant and perfect, but something in her eyes reminded him of winter, beautiful and deadly. "You look troubled, my love," she whispered as the officiant opened his book. "Tina is resting. Children catch everything. You know this." Her fingers squeezed his, nails pressing into his palm. "Don't let worry ruin our perfect day." The officiant began speaking, his voice echoing through the cathedral space, but Min-joon barely heard the words. Every instinct he'd honed through decades of surviving the underworld screamed that something was wrong. Tina had stopped screaming hours ago when her throat turned raw and no one came. She'd tried the door until her shoulders ached, tried her tablet only to find Jo had remotely disabled the Wi-Fi, tried everything except giving up. Because giving up meant Min-joon died, and she died, and Jo won. She sat on her bedroom floor surrounded by the wreckage of her desperate searching, overturned toy bins, scattered books, her desk drawers emptied across the carpet. Then her eyes landed on the small red toolbox Min-joon had given her last month. "Every person should know how to fix things," he'd said, teaching her the names of each tool with the patience of someone who'd once been powerless too. Inside, a Phillips head screwdriver, barely bigger than her hand. Tina's gaze snapped to the window. The massive floor-to-ceiling glass was reinforced, unbreakable, but the smaller ventilation window above it, the one that opened for fresh air, had a simple latch secured by 4 screws. She'd never paid attention to it before. Now it looked like salvation. She dragged her desk chair across the room, climbed onto her bed, then onto the chair balanced precariously on the mattress. Her hands shook as she fitted the screwdriver to the first screw. It wouldn't budge. She pushed harder, her palm screaming in protest, until finally it turned. 1 rotation. 2. 3. The first screw clattered to the floor. Then the second. 3rd. 4th. The latch plate came loose in her hands. She set it aside carefully, then pushed at the ventilation window. It swung outward with a rusty squeal, and Seoul's evening air rushed in, exhaust fumes and summer heat and freedom. Tina looked down. 16 floors of sheer glass and steel between her and the street below. Her stomach lurched. But to the left, about 6 feet away, the building's decorative steel framework created a lattice that maintenance workers used. If she could reach it. She stripped off her navy dress, too bulky, too constraining, leaving only her white undershirt and shorts. The dress had been beautiful. Min-joon would be disappointed. But Min-joon needed to stay alive more than he needed her to look pretty. Tina climbed through the window, gripping the frame with white knuckles. The wind whipped her braids around her face. Don't look down. Don't think. Just move. She stretched her leg toward the nearest steel beam, her toes barely brushing it. Not far enough. She'd have to jump. 3 deep breaths. Then she launched herself sideways, fingers scrabbling for purchase. Her hands caught the cold metal, but her body swung wild, slamming into the steel framework hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. Pain exploded across her ribs. She held on anyway, because falling meant dying, and dying meant failing. Hand over hand, she climbed down the lattice like the spiderwebs she'd navigated in abandoned buildings before Min-joon found her. Her palms bled where metal edges cut into soft skin. Her shirt tore on a jagged bolt, fabric ripping with a sound like defeat. But she kept moving, counting floors, 15, 14, 13, until her feet finally touched the emergency exit balcony on the 8th floor. The door was locked, of course, but the window beside it wasn't reinforced like the penthouse glass. Tina picked up a decorative stone from a planter and threw it. The window shattered with a sound like a gunshot. She climbed through, ignoring the glass that bit into her already bloody hands, and ran. The Grand Seoul Imperial Hall was across the city. The wedding had started 20 minutes ago according to the lobby clock. But Tina was free, and she was fast, and she still had time to save the only father who'd ever chosen her. Tina burst through the cathedral doors like a small hurricane, her white shirt torn and blooded, her face streaked with tears and dirt, her braids wild from the wind. 200 heads turned in synchronized shock. The officiant's voice died mid-sentence. The string quartet's violins screeched to a discordant halt. Stop! Tina's voice cracked across the silence, raw and desperate. She raised one trembling hand, the other clutching something, a photograph, torn and crumpled. Please, you have to stop. She ran down the aisle, her bare feet slapping against cold marble. Guests murmured, some reaching for concealed weapons by instinct, others simply staring at the spectacle of a child interrupting the most important criminal alliance in Seoul's history. Min-joon's world narrowed to a single point. Tina. His Tina, who should have been safe at home, was instead running toward him looking like she'd crawled through hell. Blood on her hands. Terror in her eyes. And tears. Tina never cried unless something was catastrophically wrong. Grab her, Jo hissed, her composure fracturing for just a moment. 2 of her father's guards moved forward, hands outstretched to intercept the child. Stop. Min-joon's voice was quiet but absolute. His hand rose, palm out, and the guards froze mid-step. Every person in that hall knew what happened to people who disobeyed the Dragon King. He stepped away from Jo, away from the altar, and knelt as Tina reached him. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing against his chest, her small body shaking with exhaustion and fear. Min-joon sigh. I tried to tell you, she locked me in. Sure, it's all right. His hand cradled the back of her head, mindful of the blood on her palms, the bruises already forming on her thin arms. Over her shoulder, he met Jo's gaze. The bride's face was porcelain perfect, concerned, but her eyes held something else. Something cold. Min-joon, the poor thing is clearly having an episode, Jo said, moving toward them with her bouquet still clutched in one hand. She's been so stressed about the wedding, and children sometimes. She doesn't have episodes. Min-joon kept his voice level, but his arms tightened protectively around Tina. She doesn't lie. And she definitely doesn't cry unless something is very, very wrong. He pulled back slightly, looking into Tina's face, the face of the little girl who'd been starving in an alley, who'd survived trafficking and abandonment, who'd never once cried for attention or manipulation. She cried now because she was terrified. What did you hear? He asked quietly, his thumb wiping away a tear from her cheek. Tina's breath hitched. She looked at Jo, then back at Min-joon, and thrust the crumpled photograph toward him. She's going to kill you. Tonight. After you exchange rings. The weapon is in her bouquet, hollow titanium in the stem. She works for her father. I heard her on the phone speaking Russian. I heard everything. The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of chairs as people stood. Sang-woo moved instantly to Min-joon's side, hand inside his jacket where his gun waited. Other syndicate members followed suit, the carefully orchestrated piece dissolving into the chaos of drawn weapons and shouted accusations. But Min-joon heard none of it. He looked at the photograph in his hand, Jo with the tattooed man from the Yongsan Dragons, taken through a parking garage security camera. Then he looked at his bride, standing frozen at the altar, her bouquet of white roses and orchids held like a weapon. Jo, he said softly, standing with Tina clutched against his side. Show me your bouquet. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Jo smiled, that reptilian smile Tina had seen in the library, and everything went to hell. Jo hurled the bouquet at Min-joon's face. He caught it reflexively, and in that split second, she lunged forward, her hand diving into the flowers. But Sang-woo was faster, his gun already drawn, the muzzle pressed against Jo's temple before her fingers closed around the hidden blade. Don't, Sang-woo growled. The hall exploded into motion. Park Dae-jung and his bosom crew drew weapons, shouting orders in dialect. Min-joon's syndicate responded in kind, a forest of pistols and submachine guns materializing from beneath tuxedo jackets. Guests scrambled for cover behind pillars and overturned chairs. Crystal chandeliers swayed overhead as bodies collided, and the air thickened with the metallic taste of imminent violence. Min-joon shoved Tina behind him, his body a wall between her and the chaos. With his free hand, he tore open the bouquet. White petals scattered across marble like snow. Nestled inside the hollow stem, exactly as Tina had said, was a thin titanium blade, its edge sharp enough to sever an artery with a single thrust. You were going to kill me on our wedding night, Min-joon said quietly, his voice somehow cutting through the pandemonium. After I gave you everything. After I trusted you. Jo laughed, the sound unhinged now that her mask had finally shattered completely. You gave me nothing I didn't take. You're just like all the others, powerful men who think love makes them invincible. It makes you weak, Min-joon. That child made you weak. No. Min-joon's grip tightened on Tina's shoulder. She made me human. Park Dae-jung stepped forward, his weapon trained on Min-joon. This alliance is over, Kim. You've humiliated my family. Your daughter tried to assassinate me at the altar, Min-joon interrupted, his tone ice. In front of every syndicate in Seoul. If you want war, old man, you'll have it. But you'll lose. For a moment, the two crime lords stared at each other across the ruins of their truce, fingers resting on triggers, the weight of decades of bloodshed hanging in the balance. Then Park lowered his weapon, just slightly. Take your traitor daughter and leave, Min-joon said. If I see any of you in my territory again, I won't be so merciful. The bosom crew retreated slowly, weapons still raised, dragging Jo with them. She screamed threats and curses until her father's hand clamped over her mouth. The cathedral doors slammed shut behind them, and the remaining guests exhaled collectively. Min-joon holstered Sang-woo's gun and turned to Tina. She stood trembling, her torn shirt barely covering her bruised ribs, her hand still bleeding, her eyes enormous in her small face. But she'd done it. She'd saved him. He knelt and gathered her into his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. She buried her face in his neck, and he felt her tears, relief this time, not terror, soaking into his shirt. You climbed down 16 floors, he murmured against her hair, piecing together the evidence of her escape. You were terrified. But you came anyway. You saved me first, Tina whispered. In the alley. When no one else stopped. Min-joon carried her through the wreckage of his almost wedding, past syndicate members who parted like water, past overturned chairs and scattered orchids. Sang-woo fell into step beside them, ever loyal, ever watchful. Boss, where to? Home, Min-joon said simply. We're going home. Outside, Seoul's neon lights painted the night in shades of electric blue and pink. Min-joon adjusted Tina in his arms, feeling her weight settle against his chest, solid, real, alive. No alliance was worth losing this. No empire mattered more than the small, fierce soul who'd risked everything to save him. Min-joon sigh. Tina's voice was small, exhausted. Yes. Am I still your daughter? Even though I ruined everything. He stopped walking. Looked down at her tear-stained face, at the brave, beautiful child who'd become his entire world without him realizing when it happened. "You didn't ruin anything," he said firmly. "You saved everything that matters. And yes, Tina, you'll always be my daughter. Blood or no blood." She smiled then, small and fragile, but real. And Min-joon smiled back, carrying her into the night, leaving the chaos and the empire behind. Because some bonds were stronger than power, stronger than alliances, stronger than blood itself. They were forged in rain-soaked alleys and broken bouquets, in desperate climbs and trembling confessions. They were family.